Kinship care is a process by which families or friends of the children who are involved in the dependency system go through to be able to care for them. Kinship care is about finding people who have a relationship with a child or might be able to strengthen their relationship with the child to be able to take care of them.
Informal kinship care has existed from the beginning of time. Essentially, informal kinship care is where usually a parent has decided for a variety of reasons to have her child stay with a relative or close family friend, either temporarily or long-term, without court involvement. Whereas formal kinship care is one where the child welfare agency and the courts are involved. There's a big difference between kinship care and traditional foster care when you look at how children, whether they run away from home, how they feel about their environment. Their behavior is better when they're with kinship care providers. They're less likely to bounce from foster home to foster home, frankly, because kinship care providers will understand, I know where you're coming from, and I'm not going to give up on you. It's just so tremendous the way that you can change the outcome for this child, and your ability to kind of rise to the occasion and understand that everyone's going to be angry, everyone's going to be stressed. You didn't ask for this, but you're going to rise above it and know that down the line there will be gratitude. There will be a lot of positive things when you look back at this time.
In kinship care, very often the child may have stayed over at that person's house or may have already been there, or even if they're not, there's something for children that is just intrinsic to know that my aunt or my uncle or my mom's best friend is taking care of me versus somebody that they just don't know.
I think there's just no question. I really respectfully think it's not arguable that kids should stay with families, should stay with siblings, should stay in school districts, should stay in churches or synagogues, should stay in their peer group and the like. That minimizes the damage. I said earlier that kids are damaged when we get them. Our job is not to damage them more, but to make them better.
It's much more appropriate and much better for the children if we can find people that they have relationships with, people who love them and care about them and know them, to be able to take care of them. When children are abused or neglected and they're not able to stay in their own home because of safety reasons that just can't be mitigated, we look for people that know the children, that care about the children, to be able to be the first people that we look at to care for them. So when children are abused or neglected and have to be removed from their home for safety reasons that are so severe that it's just not okay to leave them in their birth families, what we do first is try to find people who know them. That could be relatives, it could be neighbors, it could be the coach or the teacher, but somebody who already has a relationship with the child. And we look to those people first to care for the child temporarily while they're out of their birth family's home. And we do that because being abused or neglected in the first place is traumatic. Being removed from that home, while it might be critically important to make sure the child's safe, it creates its own set of trauma and its own difficulties for the child. When children are removed from their birth families, they're oftentimes removed from their neighborhoods, from their schools, from their friends, from their pets, from everything that they know. And if we take them even across town or a couple of blocks away, and we place them with people that they don't know, that's another set of trauma for those children that they experience. And I'm not saying anything negative about people who become foster parents, because they have good hearts and are very well intentioned, but if the child doesn't know them, regardless of how good they are and how welcoming they are, it's still traumatic for a child to go into a new place. I think some of the pros and cons of kinship care, certainly some of the pros are it potentially can reduce trauma for children. I think the other pro is that it lets the extended family stay involved and stay connected with the child and know what's going on. And that's really important for large families. When your children are removed from your family, it's a huge loss. So it's better if, for the family, if the child can remain within the context of the family and the family can stay involved. There are some cons to kinship care. And some of the cons are that kinship care providers, if they want to receive ongoing financial support for children, have to pass the normal foster care licensing process, and that can be a little complicated and a little difficult for kin providers. I think the other complication if you're a kin provider is that it's part of your family. So it's sometimes harder to set boundaries. You know, if the court says that mom or dad can visit at certain times, that gets difficult when mom or dad are your children. And your children are calling saying, I really want to see my child, but you know the court has said they can only do that on Saturdays, and they're calling on Monday. So sometimes grandparents saying no to their children's access to their children or the grandparents' grandchildren gets a little difficult. I think the other thing that research has shown is that while kinship care reduces the trauma that children experience, it tends to lengthen the stay in care. And I think partly that's because kin have a real good sense of what's going on. So unlike foster parents who aren't familiar with the birth family, sometimes the kin know about things that are safety issues where non-kin wouldn't, reducing the trauma for children and looking through the lens or the eyes of children and their experiences in everything that we do in dependency court, I think is the priority.
Children are removed from their birth parents for all sorts of reasons. It could be anything from lack of appropriate housing, sudden homelessness. It could be lack of utilities in the winter and an inability to stabilize that situation. Usually it's a combination of things. Substance abuse plays a large role, mental health issues. A lot of these families are in deep poverty. And so when you take a situation where a family is in deep poverty and you add on to it other complicating factors like substance abuse, mental health issues, or an economic crisis like homelessness, it's easy for that family to destabilize and for there to be a need for that child to be placed someplace temporarily while that family stabilizes.
Some of the effects that kinship care has on a child's well-being really connect to a variety of issues around well-being. One of them is the reduction of trauma and emotional health, and certainly not having significant changes in their routines or in where they're at, where they know they're going to stay, is significant, and that really helps reduce the trauma. Second really has to do with stability. What we know about kinship care, and this is not every kinship care home, but the majority of kinship care, is that kin tend to hang in there longer with children, especially children who are experiencing emotional or behavioral issues, than non-kin do. You know, an aunt or uncle tend to hang in there a little bit longer than their niece or nephew, than non-kin do.
It comes down to trauma. These events, these children will remember on their deathbeds 75 or 80 years from now. They'll remember the day that the allegedly benevolent social worker comes in and takes them away. If instead of having that occur, having them taken away to stranger care, to a different community, they go to grandma's house, they go to aunt's house, they go to their best friend's house where their best friend's mom takes care of them. It changes all the dynamics of the trauma, really blunt force trauma that otherwise can just destroy a child. We're here to protect children, to enhance children. We're not here to make things worse. And so the kinship care is the answer. I think that it's so easy for everyone involved with kids to have some empathy for the adults, be it a custody case, where mom or dad feels they're disenfranchised and appeals to you, or these kinds of cases where mom loves their child. Make no mistake about it. She may be incompetent, she may have mental health problems, drug problems, alcohol problems, housing problems, but her love's real. And so it's human nature that you're going to have empathy for her. But what you have to do, and it's difficult as the judge and as others, is you have to look through the eyes of the child. I don't know that that's a change in deliberate focus or philosophy. What it is more of us being more cognizant of that and recognizing that sometimes you have to break mom's heart, because otherwise 13 years from now, child's going to be sitting in her seat with her own baby, and we don't want that.
In terms of talking to the youth before court about what to expect, I think absolutely that's a great idea, but we have to be sensitive about whether we are creating anxiety for that youth. So there has to be a certain approach, there has to be a certain skill set that says, I have the potential to create some anxiety or some fears in this older youth, depending upon how I approach it. So I think what we have to do as professionals is begin to take direction from youth, which is difficult at times, because oftentimes as professionals we're very controlling. This is our system, this is the process we put in place, we know how it should work, we know what's the best interest for you. What I've found is successful with older youth is giving them the opportunity to speak. So you might open up with, what do you know about this court process? What do you think it entails? What are your expectations? Is this boring to you? Oftentimes I've had very youth that are somewhat stubborn and are not willing to give. But when you throw them a curveball and says, you don't really want to be here, do you? And they say, you're right, I don't want to be here. And their eyes light up, and this is why. And then you can begin to talk to them about maybe why, what they perceived as why they don't want to be there is not the actual reality. So I think oftentimes we have to give youth credit, and we have to lean on youth, that they're a lot smarter and sharper than we perceive them to be. And I think we'll get more out of the process, and I think we'll have a better opportunity to alleviate some of those anxieties when they're coming into court, because we don't know what they're thinking at that given time. We don't know what their peer interaction is like. We don't know what's going on in school. We don't know what their sibling dynamic is like, the intimacy of it. We know because we get reports and we hear from a caseworker, or we hear from the guardian ad litem, but the intricacies of it, we don't know how that youth is internalizing. And I think we have to be open enough and receptive enough to say, you tell me what you think about it, instead of kind of projecting onto them.
So one of the things that's very exciting about our office and the work that we started doing about 7 years ago was looking at this whole issue of kinship care, well-being, reducing trauma, and what would be most effective in Pennsylvania's child dependency system. And what we discovered in that process is a practice called family finding. Family finding was developed by a man named Kevin Campbell out of the state of Oregon. And Kevin came to Pennsylvania and has just been in just about every county in Pennsylvania, really teaching on this model of family finding. Family finding is about locating those kin, those people who know the child, could be relatives, could be non-relatives, and bringing all those people together to surround the child and the birth family in a way that supports the care of the child and supports the care, quite honestly, of the adults, the parents, trying to recover from whatever their issues are. Family finding was such an integral practice that was brought to the state through the courts. This practice came to us through Supreme Court Justice Max Baer, the State Roundtable, and was identified as one of the premier practices that, quite honestly, did not exist in Pennsylvania before we started our work. What happened about 3 years ago is it was so effective that our state legislature made it law. The Child Welfare Agency is required to begin the process of finding family, to be a support to the child and to be a support to the parents. If a child is removed from their home, again, due to safety and not being able to be safely maintained in their home, the Child Welfare Agency and the court is required to first look to kin and to ask questions about kinship, to ask questions about family finding, and actually to make some findings, the court's required to make some findings around the adequacy of the family finding search.
Thankfully, kinship is a really broad term. It's defined really broadly. It's essentially somebody who knows the child or who knows the family. And so it doesn't have to be a relative. It doesn't have to be somebody related to the family by blood. It could be a new step-parent of another parent. It could be a coach. It could be a teacher. It could be somebody through the church. It could be a neighbor. It could be somebody who maybe is a friend's mother from school. So it really is a wide definition, and that's exactly what we need. The point is, it's somebody who knows a child or knows a family and who'll be able to open their heart and home to that child and step in during the crisis.
For someone to become a kinship provider, really the way that they get into the system depends on the need. So if there is a call at 3 o'clock in the morning because a parent is no longer able to care for their kids, sometimes that call might come from a police officer, it might come from an EMT worker, a social worker, right, in the middle of the night because a child has identified, I want to go to Aunt's house, or my football coach will help me, or what about my pastor, right? So in those emergent cases, often we will move the child to that placement until the light of day and we can start taking care of the paperwork. Our goal has been, over the last 10 years at least, to keep kids with people they know. There was a time where in order to be considered kin, you had to be blood related. And we realized that that was severely narrowing the opportunities for kids to be with people that they knew and that they trusted. So when the law changed and broadened kin to include any person who had a connection with a child, the gates opened and wonderful things started happening because we had always had those people knocking at the door saying, I've always known Johnny, he lived 3 doors down from me, he played with my kids, can I be a caregiver? But they never qualified as being able to move further up on the chain than folks that had been in the system. So how someone puts their name up to be a kin provider really depends on how the child comes in. For some folks, they learn that a child that they have known has been in the system for quite a while, and upon learning, they make the phone call to their agency. And most agencies across the state have a dedicated foster care coordinator, and that's where you start. And in my experience, at least I know in my county, when a foster care coordinator gets a call from someone who says, I've known Jane for years and I want to be a placement option, it's a hallelujah moment because with a lot of our kids, especially the teenage kids, the 13, 14, up to 18, they're tough to place, right? Congregate care is always an option. It's not a great option. You're warehousing kids. So, but we know that kids that age tend to burn bridges and they do it well. I mean, even in intact, healthy families, that's when they're learning to push every boundary, and kids that have been in the system for a while push extraordinarily hard, essentially to see if people will still love them, right? I mean, it's honeymoon phase is over, they're gonna fight as hard as they can. So finding family and it's a broad definition of family, finding someone who cared about this child as a child and is willing to have them into their home, we try to move as many barriers as we can. There's emergency certifications that we can get. We can get people cleared very, very quickly. With the recent change in the requirement of who needs to be cleared to work with children across the Commonwealth, there's been a backlog, pretty significant backlog of how long it takes to get people cleared. But foster care coordinators have a way of making it happen quickly when it needs to. So it's a matter of making the phone call. And if someone doesn't call you back, call again. Show up at the office, right? If you mean to be a placement option for these kids that need someone who cares about them, be persistent. There is financial compensation for taking a child into care. It's necessary because kids are expensive, right? Most of them are coming, a lot of kids are coming and they haven't had a new pair of shoes purchased for them in a while. Anybody who has kids that knows there's a growth spurt where they could go through a new pair of shoes every 6 weeks, right? So the amount of money that foster families or kin families receive to keep their kids sometimes gets misconstrued as it's this boon. If you're taking good care of these children, you need every penny of it. You need every penny of it, right? Imagine the 16-year-old girl who never got to go to a formal dance and some boy asks her to go to prom. You get her a prom dress and little shoes that match, right? It's what you do for your own kids. It's what you would do for a child in your home because they've been placed there because they don't have anywhere else to go. In my experience, and I've been representing kids through the foster care system for, oh my goodness, 11 years now. I think I've had 3 cases where we had a problem with foster parents not being willing to spend money on children. Think about that. Hundreds of cases have come through, and 3 times we've had to go to court to make sure they did right by the kids in their care. So the lion's share understand that it pays for the increase in water. I mean, you have one more kid in your house, all of a sudden your water bill goes to the roof. And hopefully making them feel just as loved and taken care of as the kids that were in the home before. So it's a help. It certainly doesn't cover everything, but I think more significant is the emotional challenges that come, especially if you have a child that's coming into a home where kids already exist. That's bumpy, right? And imagine the family where you have biological children who have a great life, right? They have a lovely home and they get a car when they're 16 and of course they're going to prom and yes, they get to play sports and soccer and so on. And all of a sudden you have a child moving into the home that might not have lived in the same place for more than 6 months. They might hoard every single thing they own in a duffel bag under their bed, right? And the other kids often have no idea what to make of that. Navigating through that it requires careful attention, to say the least.
Importantly, kinship care comes with its own problems. And what we do as a society is we take the resources that we would otherwise spend to put a child into foster care or stranger care, and we help that family with its problems so that the child can grow there, and hopefully with mom or mom and dad as soon as possible. But you know, we can't, it's not as if you can pick these kids up, drop them at grandma's or aunt's or friend's house and have everything be well. Kids are damaged. Probably there's problems in grandma's or aunts or uncles, or the child welfare agencies would not be involved. The point is, though, that we have the resources to help them, and we hopefully have the ability to help them so the child can stay in the least traumatizing home.
I know a lot of the counties around the state have folks available to counsel foster parents that are in that situation that don't know what's going on, because what could look like behavioral issues can often be hidden trauma, right? Kids that are acting out are sometimes acting out because they don't feel anything unless they do, right? We see that. Kids that are seeking being in trouble sometimes don't feel alive unless they are. And a lot of kids don't believe that anyone's going to love them. They're too broken. So if I'm bad enough, they'll get rid of me just like everybody did before me. And knowing how hard to push back and when to reach out for help it's crucially important. And if you don't know, developing a good relationship with your foster care coordinator and your caseworker, and talking to your caseworker when the caseworker is coming to visit the kids in the house, and being open about that transition will increase the likelihood that it'll be successful. Because any teenager, a teenager with a perfect childhood, is going to be challenging at 15, right? So imagine, and we don't give up on them. It would never occur to us to give up on them, no matter how hard they push. And it's really important to think of it in the same way when you're talking about a child who's come into your home from the system.
What we also know, though, is that kinship care families need the same sorts of supports that non-kinship care families do. So fortunate in Pennsylvania, if somebody becomes a kinship care provider and they need help with daycare, or they need help with transportation of getting children to their different appointments, the Child Welfare Agency is in a place where they can do that and provide that help. So there are all kinds of supports to help the kinship care provider and non-kinship care providers maximize the well-being of children.
So as a parent attorney, I've seen many situations in which I'm representing let's say a mother, and the mother has a history of drug addiction, has a history of mental health issues, and has burned a lot of bridges with her family. And then in this moment of crisis, the mother, maybe doesn't want to reach out to kin, maybe feels embarrassed, feels ashamed, doesn't want them to know that this is happening in her life, is very concerned, or maybe doesn't realize that her child is in jeopardy of removal. And then, thankfully, in those situations, kin has gotten involved. And I've had scenarios where, at the beginning, the potential kinship care provider had some very serious doubts. This parent and I have a lot of friction. Why should I step in and help this person? This is just going to be really chaotic and add a whole level of crazy to my life, to be honest. And the truth is, yes, it will be a little bit chaotic, and it will be a little crazy, and it will be tense, and there'll be tense moments. But at the end of the day, this is such a tremendous thing you're doing for this child. What you're doing for this child is you're stepping in and saying, I am here, I am family, I think of you, I love you, I want to be a resource for you. I know it's going to be difficult, but I'm going to be here for you.
By the time most of these kids get to us, there's been a great deal of history. And one of the things you hear in the real world is you say to uncle, will you take your niece? And he'll say, no, because my sister's going to appear here screaming bloody murder. The police are going to be following, and my family's going to be traumatized horribly. And so I think one of the messages that we have to deliver is we need your help. More importantly, your loved one. You love this child. I don't love this child. I don't even know this child. You love this child. You care about this child. But we'll do our part. We'll keep mom away. We'll keep police well informed of what's going on, what the dynamics of, so that you don't get yourself caught in the middle. And to the extent you were caught in the middle in prior interactions with the mom or dad that's not capable of parenting, which causes us to remove the child, we weren't involved, and we'll take care of it. And then you need good judges, good social workers working in concert with one another.